Glen Lee, East Kilbride, a quiet neighborhood where doors usually shut early when night falls. But in the early hours of November 18, 2024, police broke open the lock of a small flat, and what they found inside would change their lives forever. Beneath a single towel lay the decapitated body of Phoenix Spencer Horn, 21 years old, a young woman whose name matched her spirit, a flame that had once brought warmth to everyone around her. 2 days after killing her, Euan Methan, her boyfriend of 2 years, calmly called 999 and said, "I had a psychotic break and killed my wife." No panic, no tremor, just words spoken in a steady, cold tone, as if he were describing someone else's tragedy. Phoenix had been the kind of friend everyone wished for, kind, empathetic, always the first to help others climb out of their darkest moments. But the man she loved, the man she trusted most, would be the one to destroy her. For 2 entire days after her death, Euan lived inside that flat eating, sleeping, scrolling through his phone, while her mutilated body lay only a few feet away. What could drive a man with no criminal record, no known addiction, no violent past to turn into a monster within the walls of what was supposed to be their home? This isn't just the story of a murder, it's a descent into the psychology of possession, control, and the fragile boundary between love and domination. When Phoenix Spencer Horn met Euan Methan at a family gathering, no one could have imagined that their meeting would end in tragedy. She was 21, young, hard-working, with a smile that lit up every room. He was 27, a Royal Mail postman, polite, soft-spoken, and seemingly dependable. Together, they looked like the picture of stability, a couple built on love and mutual respect. To the Spencer family, Euan was perfect. Phoenix's mother, Alison Spencer, adored him, often texting him about everyday things as if he were her own son. Phoenix herself spoke of him with quiet pride, certain that she'd found someone safe to build a life with. But no one, not even Phoenix, noticed the small fractures forming beneath that image of harmony. By early 2024, Euan began to complain about Phoenix's work schedule. She worked long hours at the Stratavan Hotel, often taking night and weekend shifts. At first, his words sounded affectionate. "I just miss you when you're gone." But over time, that tenderness turned into guilt-tripping. "You care more about your job than you do about me." Phoenix, being deeply empathetic, felt guilty. She apologized. She promised to come home earlier. That's how control begins, not with violence, but with guilt. Euan didn't forbid her from working. Instead, he made her want to change for him. Each apology from Phoenix became another step into submission, her independence shrinking under the guise of love. Outwardly, they looked like any other young couple, but inside the small flat on Glen Lee, Phoenix was fighting an invisible war between affection and emotional confinement. Friends said she was still cheerful, still smiling, but sometimes her eyes betrayed a quiet exhaustion. She was the kind of woman who tried to fix others, even if it meant breaking herself. Euan's tone in messages gradually shifted. No longer, "I miss you now," it was, "Why aren't you home?" Or, "You're too busy for me." Phoenix never fought back. She soothed him instead. "I'm sorry. I'll be home soon." When love demands an apology for simply being yourself, it's no longer love. On the evening of November 16, 2024, Phoenix finished her shift and texted Euan, "I'm on my way home, let's have dinner." Her last message to her mother came at 9:37 p.m. "Euan and I are eating dinner together." No one knew that in just a few hours, that dinner would mark the end of her life and the beginning of one of Scotland's most horrifying modern crimes. At that moment, as she sat across the table from the man she loved, smiling through exhaustion, Phoenix could not have known that she was staring into the eyes of her killer, a man whose version of love had already turned into ownership. Saturday night, November 16, 2024. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary inside the small flat on Glen Lee, East Kilbride. Phoenix came home after a long day at the Stratavan Hotel, still smelling faintly of coffee and perfume, her energy soft but steady. She and Euan sat down for dinner, a quiet meal that, to her, symbolized peace after a tearing day. But in truth, it was the calm before the storm. Around 8 p.m., Euan ordered takeaway. The delivery driver later told police that Euan looked completely normal, not drunk, not high, not angry. For investigators, that detail would later become crucial. It meant he was fully aware of what he was about to do. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix sent her final message to her mother. Euan and I are eating dinner together. It was her last contact with the world outside. After 10 p.m., the downstairs neighbors began hearing strange noises, heavy footsteps, then muffled thuds, then silence. At first, they thought the couple was arguing, but the sounds that followed were not an argument, they were a fight for life. In that narrow hallway, Phoenix Spencer Horn was fighting for her life. Euan attacked her with 3 different knives. The assault was brutal, relentless. According to the autopsy, Phoenix suffered 20 stab wounds, 10 of them to her face. 1 deep thrust into her chest that pierced her vital organs. He also strangled her, pressing his hands around her throat as she struggled to breathe. The crime scene later told a horrific story, blood trails from the bathroom to the hallway, then to the bedroom, proof that Phoenix tried to escape. 1 knife was found in the bedroom, 2 others beside her body. Euan's phone activity tracker showed a sudden spike in movement around midnight, matching the timeline of the neighbors' accounts.
Did you hear any noises or bangs?
I had a bad smell in my house the early hours of the morning she was found, basically just before I went to my bed. There was a bad smell in my kitchen, basically where the walls joined together. Horrific, absolutely, just it gives me shivers thinking about it, if I'm honest.
It was digital proof of a killing in progress. After the attack, Euan didn't flee. He stayed. He watched the stillness he'd created, then began the next stage of his crime, a calculated cover-up. He took the same knives and decapitated her body, attempting to dismember her further, cutting at her wrists and ankles in a grotesque attempt to erase what he had done. This wasn't madness. It was control, the final, absolute form of it. When the killing stopped, Euan cleaned the knives, pulled a towel over Phoenix's body, and sat down in silence. Then, like a man checking his messages after dinner, he unlocked his phone and began searching for cocaine dealers online. For the rest of that night, he scrolled, texted, and waited, living among the blood and the silence he had created. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Allison Spencer was smiling at her phone, thinking her daughter was safe at home after work. But inside that flat, Phoenix's bright light had been extinguished.
Somebody had said to me, if God came to you and said, I'm going to give you this beautiful daughter, but you'll only have her for 18 years, and then we need to take her back, would you still want her? And I would take those 18 years and go through the pain rather than have nothing. And although just now that probably offers no words of comfort for Phoenix's parents, maybe one day it can.
And Herr Killer calm, sober, and deliberate had just entered the most disturbing 48 hours of his life. What he did next would shock even the most hardened detectives, not because of how he killed, but how he lived afterward. After Phoenix's death, the flat on Glen Lee became a silent tomb. For the next 2 days, Euan Methan lived inside it, breathing the same air as the mutilated body of the woman he once claimed to love. Some killers don't run from what they've done, they stay. Not out of guilt, but out of control. Immediately after the murder, Euan cleaned up the blood, covered Phoenix's body with a towel, and walked away from her remains. There was no panic, no breakdown. Instead, there was a chilling calmness. Around 2:40 a.m., on November 17th, just hours after the killing, he texted drug dealers, trying to buy cocaine. He kept messaging them all night and into the following day. Forensic investigators later discovered that, during those hours, Euan accessed websites 170 times, mostly adult content. He spent more than 10 hours online, while Phoenix's decapitated body lay hidden under a towel only a few feet away. A forensic psychologist later said, "This is what we call moral dissociation, when a killer no longer sees the victim as a human being. only as an object. That Sunday morning, Phoenix's mother, Alison Spencer, sent a text. "Hi, Fee. Just checking if you're okay." A message came back not from Phoenix, but from her killer. "Fee's still sleeping. I'll have her text you later. X." That small letter X at the end, a little kiss. A habit Phoenix always used, was enough to convince Alison everything was fine. He knew exactly how to imitate her. He knew how to make her mother feel safe, and he used that knowledge as a weapon. Later that day, Euan drove around East Kilbride in Phoenix's red Vauxhall Corsa, still pretending she was alive, sending more fake messages, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. This is what we call maintenance control, when a killer continues to manipulate others to feel a sense of dominance, even after the victim's death. By Monday morning, November 18th, the lie began to crumble. Phoenix was supposed to work that day. She was known for her reliability. She never missed a shift, never failed to text if she was running late. When she didn't show up, her coworkers grew immediately concerned. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Inside the flat, Euan sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone, still messaging drug dealers, pretending the world outside didn't exist. But reality was closing in. Finally, around midday, he picked up the phone and dialed 999. "I had a psychotic break," he said, voice unnervingly calm. "And I killed my wife." It wasn't a confession born of guilt, it was a man realizing he could no longer keep the lie alive. When police broke through the door that afternoon, they would uncover a crime so deliberate, so emotionally void, that even the most seasoned detectives would later call it one of the darkest cases they had ever seen. By noon on November 18th, 2024, when the emergency operator answered a new 999 call, no one expected to hear a man confess to one of Scotland's most horrifying modern murders. "I had a psychotic break, and I killed my wife." The voice on the line belonged to Euan Methan, calm, flat, eerily steady. No tears, no panics, just a rehearsed tone, as if he'd practiced the words. When a killer confesses but still tries to control the narrative, that isn't remorse, that's manipulation. During the call, Euan didn't simply admit to murder. He tried to frame himself as the victim. He claimed that he and Phoenix had been messing around, that he'd been taking steroids and cocaine, and that something must have been spiked. He insisted it was all a terrible accident, not an act of rage. But when police arrived at the flat on Glen Lee, every lie collapsed. What they found inside shocked even the most hardened investigators. Phoenix Spencer Horn's decapitated body lay under a towel in the hallway. 2 blood-covered knives were beside her. A third had been tossed into the bedroom. Blood covered the walls, the floor, and even the door frames the silent evidence of a prolonged, frenzied assault. When officers handcuffed Euan, he remained unnervingly calm. He didn't cry or resist. He only said one thing: "I couldn't stay with her like that. I tried to cut her up." Those aren't the words of a man who lost control. They're the words of someone who never intended to give it back. In interrogation, Euan continued his act, repeating that he'd blacked out, that drugs had made him violent, that he wasn't himself. But investigators were ready. Phone data proved he'd been texting Phoenix's mother, pretending to be her. Search history showed hundreds of explicit sites accessed after the murder. The food delivery driver testified he'd been sober that night. The movement tracker on his phone matched the exact time of the killing. Toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol in his system. Everything pointed to premeditation and full awareness. He hadn't blacked out, he had planned, acted, and covered up with chilling precision. When police informed Alison Spencer about her daughter's death, her world collapsed. Through sobs, she asked one question no one could answer. "So, all those texts I got, they weren't from her." There's no cruelty greater than making a mother believe her child is still alive through the very phone that should have been evidence of her death. In court, Euan's defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, but the prosecution's words cut through every excuse. He wasn't insane. He was in control until the very end. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. Euan Methan was found guilty of murder, and of attempting to destroy evidence, sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. The law can sentence a man, but it can't measure the depth of what he took from the world that night. On July 14, 2025, inside the High Court of Scotland, Lord Matthews looked directly at the man in the defendant's box, the same man who once played the role of a loving boyfriend, now hollow-eyed in a gray prison uniform. His words fell like stone. Life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years. There was no reaction. Euan Methan didn't cry, didn't plead. He simply lowered his head, never once turning toward the Spencer family, the family that had once called him son. He had written a letter of remorse, claiming, "I know how loved Phoenix was, how much she completed her family. I can't believe I've taken her away from them." But the judge replied coldly, "That letter answers none of the questions that will haunt her family for the rest of their lives." Justice was served, but justice doesn't bring peace. Not when love is replaced by absence. Alison Spencer, the mother who once texted her daughter every morning, now stood before the court with trembling hands. Through tears, she said, "If God told me I could only have my daughter for 18 years, I'd still say yes, because those 18 years were worth every bit of pain that came after." In the months after the trial, the Spencer family refused to let Phoenix's story end in silence. They donated every dollar from her memorial fund to Women's Aid Glasgow, an organization that helps women escape abusive relationships. The charity issued a statement that read, "Her name Phoenix no longer stands for loss. It stands for strength, for change, for rising again from the ashes. Euan Methan may one day walk free, perhaps at 50 years old, but for the Spencer family, the sentence will last forever. Because sometimes justice has an end, but grief doesn't." The final image fades to Phoenix's photo, her smile radiant, full of the light she gave to others. If you ever see someone being controlled, silenced, or made to feel small in the name of love, don't look away. Silence is the quiet partner of every tragedy. Phoenix Spencer Horn, 21 years old, a light extinguished too soon, yet one that still shines in the lives she saved.